Thanks very much, Daniel. Let me try to see how do I share screen because I have a presentation to share. Over the last few years, particularly since starting the collaboration with Professor Sarah Candidine and Professor Jeffrey Shaw on starting the Hong Kong Martial Arts Living Archive, we have had multiple opportunities to present our research findings, both in terms of exhibitions and at various occasions in academic symposium and conferences in Hong Kong, as well as in Europe. And of course, much of that research finding has also been presented by my good friends and research partners, Jeffrey and Sarah. As I said, a lot of the work currently undertaken in developing a 3D methodology to documentation, archiving, and representing traditional martial arts came out of the effort to construct an archive for Hong Kong traditional martial arts. The reason for that was let's say about 10 years ago, I came to a realization that a lot of traditional martial arts in Hong Kong were at a very challenging moment in their development. The question of inheritance, the question of safeguarding these traditions and passing down and reviving, as well as making these traditions relevant and interesting to younger people has been extremely challenging. And unfortunately, at the time, and still is the case to a large degree, a lot of these masters are getting on without the younger generation necessarily stepping up to take over these traditions. So with the support of City University of Hong Kong, and particularly with the support from Jeffrey Shaw and Sarah Candidine, we explored the technologies that were and are available and most suitable for the documentation of traditional martial arts, really with the view of preserving this knowledge and putting them into the archive. The starting point is really quite simple, but over time, through our exhibition effort, through presenting our research findings in Europe, particularly the Kung Fu Motion exhibition in Lausanne at EPFL 2 years ago, I had the opportunity, thanks really to Sarah, to connect with Daniel, to Roberto, with the practicing community, with the research community in Europe, which has really brought us to the present. So much of my presentation today will center around the current research work being undertaken in conjunction and in close partnership and collaboration with Opera Nova in Italy, in partnership with my good friends Roberto, Jacopo, Moreno, and many others. The three named presenters, of course, have already spoken yesterday. And my presentation will also include some of the research currently undertaken in conjunction with, or in parallel to the work we're doing with Opera Nova on the Chinese side. That's to say, working closely with my martial arts brother and with my teacher, Professors Ma Mingda and Ma Lianzhen, and more particularly, documenting the martial arts of Ma's Tongbei martial studies. As is already well covered by Daniel, by Manuel, the modes of knowledge transmission in martial arts over the past over 2 millennia, we shall say, but more particularly over the last 500 years, has transformed from one that was heavily reliant on oral transmission to textual documentation and using text as a complementary strategy for documenting and teaching and passing down martial arts, without which I dare say we would not have been in a position today to bring back to life a lot of these very valuable traditions in Europe as well as in Asia. In 21st century, we are now in the moment where the opportunity has arrived for us to go beyond the books, to go beyond just to hand-to-hand transmission, which remain absolutely essential to martial arts teaching and the passing down of knowledge. I'm not saying that digital transmission can replace that, but it's become another very important parallel strategy. And as is proven by all of our experience today, yesterday, and over the past year, will have a more important role to play, increasingly important role to play going forward. So let me talk about motion capture. The motion capture at the moment, it's primarily done out of Hong Kong at the wonderful facilities at the City University of Hong Kong, at the School of Creative Media. We have a motion capture lab where the effective motion capture space is 4 meters times 8 meters. We have a set of 24 cameras recording at the speed of 120 frames per second. Now, I am not mentioning these figures to impress you. I'm mentioning these figures because they are important, and please bear those in mind because my presentation will come back to those setup later on. In terms of the process, it's an extremely laborious and complicated process, but we can simply divide it into 2 parts. There is the data capture part, that's to say the actual motion capture. And then there is what we do with the data, how we represent the data, and that is mainly through 3D animation. The motion capture could be subdivided into performance and data cleanup. At this moment in time, just to give you a sense of the scale of challenge and the sense of labor involved, for performance of 45 seconds, between 45 seconds to 60 seconds, we need about 2 weeks of cleanup time. Now, we have already significantly sped up this process compared to about 4 weeks, 5 years ago, or 6 years ago. And then the animation, and the animation are 2 parts. There's the building of the 3D figure, and then applying the motion data to the 3D figure. So to give you a very simplified view, this is what the motion capture session will actually look like. So it's a live recording. Everything is done according to the live performance. So on the top right side, you will have the performance by our distinguished speaker, my martial arts brother, Ma Lianzhen, and on the left side is the reconstituted 3D figure in performance. And the two should match up. There's a slight slack in the transmission, so I will speak a little bit more slowly here. As you can see, with the use of the two-handed sword, and for those of you who are trained and have experience with two-handed sword, you can see and you know that the length of two-handed sword starts from 120 centimeters. That is really the minimal length of the two-handed sword. A more average length would be between 140 to 165 centimeters, going up, of course, with the big German two-handers to 170, 180, and beyond. Remember, in the motion capture lab, we only have 4 meters in width at the facility in Hong Kong. And also in terms of the space moving forward, it's 8 meters, including the space backwards and forwards, including the person and including the sword. When I refer you to the motion capture data and the animated figure you saw just now, you can see that it's a performance, it's a video that's stitched together, because with this space, it's basically impossible to actually complete a performance on its own. In terms of what you see, going back to a bit more details on the 3D data, when we put on the markers on the body, and I should repeat, we have refined our model, we've added a lot of these markers. We do not get the motion capture data according to the setup and according to the model we use, unless we have a marker. So the more markers we use, the more accurate the model. But the more markers we have, the more work correspondingly we have to do. Going back to 2016, we use 99 markers, so about 100 markers. Over the last 2 years, through working with sophisticated martial art systems, where intricate body movements in the joints, in the opening and closing of the back, of the shoulders, of the hip, of the chest, really play an important role in understanding and accurately documenting and representing martial arts. We have increased the number of markers more than 10% to between 110 to 120 markers. And that adds significantly to our workload. From the raw data, we have to do rigging. We have to say to build a skeleton. And again, the more markers we have, the more sophisticated and the more accurate a model, the more joints, the more it resembles an actual human model, an actual human skeleton. And from there, we put on the skin, we put on texture to make it resemble an actual man or woman. Now, before going into the work that we have done over the last 2 years, I want to give you a couple of case studies to show you some of the examples that we have done since 2017. Really going in quite different tantrums. First is the reconstruction of a very important turn of the 20th century Cantonese master, Lam Sao-wing. For those of you who practice or have exposure or knowledge to Chinese martial arts, this figure really doesn't need an introduction. He represents, or the school that he represented, is now one of the most important Chinese martial arts school in a international or global context. He is also one of the first people to pioneer the use and make detailed use of photography at the turn of the 20th century. Because of that, this has enabled us to build a 3D model like this. So the photograph that I show you, or the image I showed you on the first page of this case study, is actually a rebuilt 3D model and not of the photograph, and it's reconstructed from these photos. Now, to take you through the process very quickly, we have to do a rough model. In this case, in 2016, 2017, we worked with one of the top animation studios based in Canada who has handled important Hollywood film projects like King Kong to build a model for us. So as you can see, we had to build the body, the head, the hands, the legs, the feet, the limbs, etc. From there, we started to do detail modeling, where we added all the details, the skin, the texture, the clothing, to build a 3D example like you see here, which is completely 3D. And it's available in very fine detail. Now, of course, we don't necessarily have to use a human-like figure, as we shall see later. But for 2017, that is a decision we made. And once we have something quite detailed, then we can go on to the sort of lighting we wanted to use. We added colors, clothing, textile to give it more lifelike. And then the second part is the animation. So to recreate a compelling reconstruction of Lam Sao-wing, not only standing there and looking pretty, but doing martial arts, we are in a privileged position where the teaching that he taught over 100 years ago are preserved by his lineage descendants and indeed by many Chinese martial arts schools representing his style throughout the world. In this case, we have chosen his great-grandnephew, Oscar Lam Chun-ho, to do the performance. The next few slides I'm going to use are provided by the company based in Hong Kong that specializes in 3D animation and special effects, VFX Nova. We use 70 joints to make it accurate. We had Oscar come into City University to make the performance, but as you can see, the actual performance, if you compare Oscar's figure on the left, and when we compare it to the actual performance by the master, there is a significant gap. So in order to make the two match, we had to basically tune a lot of the discrepancies by hand, frame by frame. It took us more than half a year to make this tuning, to achieve a final result like this. Let me go on to the second example, which also had bearing on my presentation today. In 2018, the following year, we made another study of how to apply motion capture and connecting motion capture with contemporary traditional Chinese martial arts practice. In this case, a very traditional or historical style called the White Crane from Fujian, which has documented textual record going back around 200 years. Indeed, this particular school of martial arts was also very influential, not only in China, but indeed in Southeast Asia, in Japan, and in Okinawa. So in one of the most important textual records in Japan, called the Bubishi, known otherwise as the Bible of karate, there is a page that illustrates the figure of the white crane on the left-hand side. However, there is otherwise no record of white crane techniques in the book, specifically specified. So we decided to match the two. In this case, the challenge is we wanted to build and illustrate in a playful manner how to bring a 2D figure to a 3D platform. So we did a series of studies together again with my friend Victor Wong from VFX Nova, and this is the final result we achieved. It's a completely 2D model or 2D figures you can see, and in the representation it's still 2D. However, the movement in space is completely 3D. Now this actual example actually came into play and is relevant to the study that I am currently doing with Opera Nova and with Mars Tombay, because in the current research we're doing, we have decided to connect 16th century martial treatises from Italy and corresponding textual records from China to contemporary practice, both in terms of the living legacy preserved in Mars Tombay system and in terms of the historical, very compelling historical reconstruction, spearheaded and developed after rigorous 25 years of rigorous research by Roberto Gotti and his school. So, historical martial arts. You will already have seen a slide from Daniel earlier on. This was done 2 years ago when Roberto, Jacopo, Daniel came to Hong Kong to participate in the second International Martial Studies Conference. We also took that opportunity to bring them to the motion capture lab to do some initial documentation. Daniel didn't show you the full clip. This is a slightly different presentation from the 2019 display at the Minsk exhibition presented by Roberto. This is basically the figure. I don't really have time to go into detail to show you, but it is a flawed model. And it took us a long time to understand why. Roberto wasted no time in telling me that either his student, Jacopo, did a very bad job, which I don't think is the case, or there was something wrong with the model, which I think is something that we had to really rectify. So, on that note, we started to look at the performance and the 3D figure and comparing the two frame by frame from different angles. For those of you who are historical martial arts practitioners, you can look at this frozen frame, which are supposed to correspond to each other, and you can see they do not correspond to each other. The alignment of the body, you can see on the top left image, is wrong. Both wrists are wrong. The right wrist is turning at the wrong angle, the sword is at the wrong angle, and if you do this, there is no power. You cannot execute the cut. And we found multiple examples like that, which I will not go into. The reason for that, we realized, are multiple. Maybe I can simplify two things. One is the speed at which we capture was insufficient, and therefore a lot of the detailed movements in terms of the movement of the sword far exceeded the speed that 120 frames per second could capture. We initially started this motion capture and living archive project for living martial arts, which had a heavy focus on fists and on using body without arm tradition. And of course, the movement of the limbs and of the body with weapons and without the weapons they travel at different speed. So that's one reason. The other reason, which we only started to notice when we started to collaborate closely with Roberto, is the proportion of the human body. Unless the model is completely in proportion to the performer, there is discrepancy, simply put. So we went back to the drawing board. We completely adjusted the model. Jacopo, you're a lot more handsome than the Michelin-looking man on the left. I have to apologize, but this is the best work that our motion capture specialist could do. As far as we could see, it's pretty accurate. So the next step, having accurate data and having a relatively accurate model, is we have to rebuild the 3D model. We were committed to fulfill Roberto's vision of bringing Achille Marozzo back to life. This is the man, this is the maestro, and these are the sources. So this is what we did. We translated the images from 16th century manual to 360-degree 3D model. After a very laborious process, this is what we have done. As you can see, to ensure absolute accuracy in every movement, we use the corrected data, which is corrected by hand on the left-hand side, and match it with the 3D data built by Victor. And we put the two one over the other in overlap to ensure that every movement, every posture is accurate. To give you another view, the two working together, traveling back to time to the original vision when we did the motion capture at the Hong Kong City University. This is what we wanted to achieve. And I have to say, not so bad. And then after this, we wanted to give this texture to make it look like a proper old manual. So we'll give it proper texture in terms of the special effects, which is an area that Victor really specialized and excelled at. We had to do that not only for the master, but also for the disciple, on which, unfortunately, because the book was written by the master, with the master as the primary point of reference, we did not have so many perspectives. So the model that we accomplished for the student is not quite as compelling, but okay, it's usable. Now, this is a little preview of what we are going to present at the exhibition. The Way of the Sword, Warrior Traditions in China and Italy. This is a little taste to my audience, but addressing in particular to my friend Roberto. This is what I imagine we're going to achieve for every line of Achille Marozzo's Opera Nova, for every technique in a two-handed sword, both in the one-person performance and in multiple interpretations. Two-handed sword, dagger, empty hand against dagger, two swords, sword and buckler, sword and shield, sword and cape, partigiana, etc. You get my point. Unfortunately, I have completely run out of time, but I thought I should end with maybe just a couple more videos, which you will find interesting. At the beginning of my talk, I talked about the processes of documentation and building 3D model and how complicated it is. Now, this is showing a different model because I think Jacopo is already probably quite tired from repeating the same motion again and again in my presentation. So instead, I'm showing another video, which will also be on the display. Way of the Swords exhibition with Professor Ma Lianzhen. This is the full, one full sequence of Ma's Tongbei two-handed sword. As you can see, from start to finish, this is basically the process that we have to go through. No time for anything else. No time to talk about the sfera, which is something covered in much more eloquent fashion by Roberto in yesterday's keynote. So let's end with a view of what the sfera in the 21st century might look like. I have to apologize that this is a rough model. This is not what we intend to present at the exhibition, because as you can see, the hands are not in the right place. The man is not gripping it. The neck, the position, the elbows, they are not quite right. But this is the kind of vision we want to represent. We want to construct and offer the methodology, the possibility that after detailed and faithful documentation of the martial arts, we can represent it in a scientific way that will explain the principle of the masters from the 16th century in a way that is visually compelling and easy to understand. Here ends my presentation. Apologies to everyone for overrunning. Thank you.